Hi, everybody. Happy New Year and welcome.
We have a ton of cool features to show you today. We really want to have fun and we've prepared a lot of demos. We really like demos.
And to make it even more interesting, we asked some of our best friends at Oracle to present to go with us. So we have some special guest stars today.
So let's dive right into it. But first, let us shortly introduce us. This is Mike. He's a real Oracle superstar, and I guess he doesn't need much more introduction. He's a product manager for database upgrade and migration, and he's the go-to guy on those subjects. He has a really good blog that I encourage you to follow, and in addition, you can safely follow him on social media. He doesn't post any food pictures nor cat videos.
The same applies to Daniel's social media presence as well, so it's safe to follow him on Twitter. But it's even more important to go to Daniel's blog, dohdatabase.com, because you won't find just cloud migration techniques and step-by-step instructions, but also, in addition, a lot of deep dive information about how to upgrade. So Daniel is the product manager for cloud migrations, and we work together with a lot of customers all over the world.
We promised you special guest stars, and we have Connor joining today all the way from sunny Australia. Connor is our developer advocate for SQL and a frequent speaker. Besides that, he's one of the main contributors to the Ask Tom website. Also, Frederick is joining from Mexico. He is one of the main architects behind our auto upgrade tool, and he's a real wizard in Java. And finally, Jeff is joining as well from the US. When it comes to ORDS, SQL CL, or SQL Developer, he is the go-to guy.
So before we start, a few organizational things. At first, as usual, this video will be recorded and it will be available for on-demand viewing afterwards. It takes usually a week until we make it available, and you get to the video recording on the upgrade blog, mikedietrich.com/videos. Second topic, the slides. The slides are already available for download. So if you want the slides on your PC right now, you go to the upgrade blog, mikedietrich.com/slides, webinar 2021, and then you download the slides from there. And third, Daniel and I are in a seminar all the time. So even though we pre-recorded that, the sole purpose is that we can answer all your questions while you watch the seminar. So please use the Q&A, not the chat option of Zoom. Use the Q&A option, and Daniel and I will answer your questions live. In case we can't answer them right now, please follow up with us via email afterwards. So email addresses at Oracle work always firstname.lastname@oracle.com. Wait a bit, one important thing. We have an agenda for today, and we will do a break. So approximately after 1 hour, there will be a 5-minute break for you to refresh yourself, refill your coffee, teas, whatever. And the entire seminar will be running approximately 2 hours. So now, let's go in and enjoy. Now let me start our cool feature session with an oldie but a goodie, extended varchar 2. And the reason why we included this here, even though the feature is a decade old already, is that not everything is mentioned in the documentation. So extended varchar 2, the idea is that you can store more than the typical 4,000 byte in a varchar 2 field or an nvarchar 2. So with that feature, it fits up to 32K. The requirements, you have to be on Oracle 12.1. You have to, or newer, of course, and you have to set compatible to 12.1.0 or newer or higher. And then you can turn on this feature explicitly. So it's nothing which comes just there because you create a new database, at least not until 19c. And when you are on the Oracle Cloud, just as a side note here, in Autonomous, for instance, that is on by default, which is very convenient, actually. I haven't checked the other cloud deployments, but I can just sense that it's there on as well, and it's quite useful. When you turn this on, it's irreversible, so you have this now in your database and can't turn this off. The parameter controlling it is max string size. By default, it's set to standard. And when you change it to extended, you can enable that feature. But only changing the parameter is not the way how to enable that feature. Very important, if you use multi-tenant, which a lot of you do already, you can enable this on a PDB level, which is, I think, very, very important to know, because enabling that feature requires a restart in upgrade mode. And it's much easier to restart a single PDB in upgrade mode than the entire CDB with all your PDBs. So let us dig into that and see what we have to do in order to be able to use that feature. And we start with a parameter change. So we set max string size to extended, just in the SP file, because we need to shut down the database and then start it up, very important, in upgrade mode. And then we can execute the script UTL-32K, which is an RDBMS admin. And that script explicitly checks for compatible to be at least 12.10 or higher. And it checks also that the database is started in upgrade mode. Once the script has completed, which usually takes just maybe 20 seconds or something like that, then we shut on immediate, we start up again in regular mode, and the same would apply to a single PDB, of course. And now I can create objects like this table here, applicants, where you see the last column called CV is now a varchar 2 of 32,767 byte, which is the maximum for this data type. Looks great, is extremely helpful, no doubt, but there are a few things to mention and to take care on. And I would call this the fine print, the things which are not in the documentation, or at least not obvious in the documentation. And the first thing is something I think Ludovico Caldara blogged about this at first. He wanted to find out how many bytes can I really insert and what happens to the data. So when you create a new table, like the table I created on a slide before with the CV column, until I insert up to 3,964 bytes into that column or in a field in that column, it's still stored as a regular varchar 2. No change and no lob segment allocated. Just if I go above that limit, then now the data will be stored in an inline secure file lob. This is important to understand, and it's not exactly 4,000. If you want to lower that threshold, you can set Scala type lob storage threshold to a value lower than 4,000. Higher doesn't make sense, so I haven't tried that. But then you can trigger the migration into an inline secure file lob earlier if you need to. If you do this now for an existing table, so you adjust with an alter table statement the column length from, let's say it was a varchar 2 4,000, and now you extend it to varchar 2 9,000. That is very important to understand what happens here, because it won't migrate into an inline secure file lob at this point. It will just do row chaining. So be very aware of that, because that could be really impacting in terms of performance. So if you want the same behavior as for a new table, then you have to rebuild the object, either with DBMS redefinition or with online table move, a feature we will talk later about. Another thing we need to discuss here is performance. And Frank Pachot from DBA Services blogged about this a long while ago. And Frank found out that the number of round trips is much, much lower when we use the extended varchar 2 compared to traditional CLOB data. So what I do here in this example, I have one table with only one column where my data is in a CLOP, and I have the same table, but now not with a CLOP column, but with an extended varchar of length 9000, storing just 10 rows in each of them and doing a select star. You see on the left side, I have 52 round trips. On the right side, only 2 round trips. So you need to consider this and try it out, of course, but it could be really beneficial and get you better performance, even though a bit more data is sent over the SQLnet connection, but less round trips. Could be good. Try it out. This is a often positive aspect of the extended varchar 2 types. And the final thing I would like to mention in that case, something which is not obvious in the documentation, I guess. There's also potential pitfall, and we just came across this in upgrades recently. When we store data, and this applies not only to extended varchar, but here it becomes really important, we have a potential pitfall. And a potential pitfall means that we need at least 16 blocks in an extent, 16 Oracle blocks in an extent, until compatible is 18C or lower. And beginning with 19C compatible, we need 32 blocks in an extent to be able to create a secure file up. Otherwise, that will fail. So this means a simple example to demonstrate that. I have a database with DB block size 16K, and there are a lot of databases with 16K or even bigger block sizes out there. Now I create a table space, and I notice from some customer projects as well, the uniform size hasn't been set too high. But be very, very careful with very low settings, because here in my example, I set it to only 128K. And that means every extent contains 8 Oracle blocks. And with 8 Oracle blocks in one extent, I can't create a secure file up. And so I can't create also a varchar 2 extended column in that. It may sound a bit artificial, but as we've seen this now in 2 customer cases with upgrades, I would like to recommend you to pay attention. There's a very simple workaround for that. Unfortunately, you can only set this when you create a table space. Don't set too low uniform extension sizes. So like 128 or 256K, that may get you in trouble, especially in combination with a large DB block size. So be aware of that. But overall, extended varchar 2, cool feature, can give you a lot of benefit. And as I said before, it's standard in the cloud already. So feel free to use it. Oldie but goodie. Let's go on with the next feature.
Next, I would like to talk about online data file move, which is a feature that was introduced in 12.1, and it is an enterprise edition feature. You can use it to rename a data file. In this example, I'm giving a data file a new name, but I could also use it to relocate the file into a different directory or even to a different mount points. You could imagine that the data stored in that data file is no longer accessed that much, and you want to move it to a lower cost storage. You can move data files from regular table spaces, but you can even do it from system table spaces like sysaux and undo, but it doesn't work for temp files. You can also use it to relocate your data files into ASM. If you want to do that, you just have to specify the ASM disk group name, and the database will automatically generate an OMF name. You can also use it to generate OMF names for your data files, even if you're not using ASM. Simply omit the destination part of the command, and the database will generate an OMF name. And you can also see here that I'm using the file ID as a reference instead of the full file name. If you live in the multi-tenant world, you should be aware that the alter database move data file command only works within the current container. So if you're logged into CDB $root, you can only move data files that belong to the root container. If you need to work on a data file that belongs to a PDB, you have to switch into that PDB and then issue the command. I have a demo that shows how we can move a data file from one location to the other and still access the data. So let's see how it works. I have my user 01 data file that I would like to relocate into a different folder. So I use the order database move data file command. And while that happens, while the database is copying the file, in another session, I'll try to access some data that is stored in that data file. I have the lots of data table, which belongs to the user's tablespace. And as you can see, I can still query the data, even though the data file is being moved by the database. There it is, it has the new location. Now imagine that I want to relocate the file into ASM. I have my create file disk set to ASM, and I simply use the file ID as a reference, and I omit the destination part, and the database will generate an OMF name in ASM and start to move the file. That's very simple. It's so easy, and you can move your data files around even when the database is online and the data is being accessed.
The next topic we would like to talk about is installation and patching. And what if you could not only download and install the base release, and then afterwards the most recent release update, and then maybe some one-off patches, but do this all in one pass, including the most recent O patch as well. And this is what we would like to talk about. And in addition, also show you the aspects of the new default, actually the read-only homes. So installation and patching at the same time. When you download a release, it's typically always the base release. So in 19C, it's 19.3.0. So you get 19.3.0, but what if you could install at the same time also the most recent release update? And this is something you can do since Oracle Database 18c. So you can install and patch at the same time. The installer got a feature for that. So what we see on the slide here is the grid infrastructure installation, where this works as well. So we create the directory. I name it here grid 1990. And I change into that directory. I unzip the base release. This is 19.3.0 grid infrastructure. And then in the same directory, I unzip also the most recent release update. What I start the installation with grid setup, but I pass on this -apply RU parameter and the directory name of the subdirectory where I unzip the patch into. And the same thing, of course, works with the database as well. And here you may use this way more often. So I create a directory, U01 up Oracle product 1990, change into that directory, unzip the base release 19.3.0, and then unzip also the most recent release update into that directory. And I start the installer with -apply RU, and I pass on the directory where I unzipped the patch to. In addition, you can also install one-offs if you want to. -apply RU for an RU here a little bit older one, and some one-offs. And you may wonder about that strange patch / and X / and Y /. I just shortened this a little bit to fit on the slide here. But when you apply more than one RU, but also one-off patches in addition, it's important that you keep the subdirectory trees completely separate. Because otherwise, if you unzip all of them under one single directory, maybe for instance under patch, then the patch XML file will be overwritten by the next patch and the next patch again, and you can't install it because the installer won't find the different patches you would like to apply. So the rule is here, if you use that and you have more than one RU, you have one-offs as well, keep them in totally separate directory trees, and then the installation will find them. Unfortunately, not good news, this is not implemented on Windows yet, and I don't have any information if and when this will be available on the Windows platform as well. Then in addition to that feature, we have the read-only home. So also that became a new feature in 18C. And I haven't seen so many people using that, even though I use it by myself, because it adds quite a little bit of convenience when you exchange your homes quite often. The idea of read-only homes is that the flexible part of the home is in one part, and the constant or steady part, like your TNS names files or certain admin files for your database, stay in a separate part. And when you exchange the home, that steady part will stay constant. So you don't have to copy over your TNS names and your listener aura over and over and over again to a new home. And this applies to all the files you would like to keep. So it makes exchanging the homes, especially when you patch with the technique I showed you before, much, much easier. It's of course documented. So the idea is simple and easy cloning and provisioning. And configuration and log files stay outside of the Oracle home. What do you have to do here? It's very, very simple. You install as usual, as I showed you before, and then you run ROOH for read only Oracle home CTL -enable. That's a short script. You see it on the right side of the slide here. It just takes a few seconds, and it checks, sets the permissions correctly for the directories and the files, and that's it. Very simple, very straightforward. I will show you this in a demo in a second. And here's the demo already. So in this demo, I would like to show you, first of all, the installation of Linux base release plus a release update, and then changing this home to a read-only home before going forward. So let's go in. And at first, we create a directory. I name it ROOH19 for read-only home 19. And now I copy from my shared folders the 1930 zip file, and then the release update all into this directory. Plus, not to forget, OPatch. So what do we have here? We have 3 zip files, 19.3, the release update, and OPatch. So I unzip at first the base release, and then I clean it up. Then I remove the OPatch directory from my unzipped base release, and I unzip now OPatch, the most recent one. Remove the zip file as well. And now I unzip also the release update and remove it. Let me set my Oracle home before I go on. And now I call the run installer with -apply ru. And I just named a subdirectory where I unzip the patch. Here it is only one, so I don't have to care or keep that in separate subdirectories. The installer starts, set up the software only. It's a single instance installation, Enterprise Edition, of course, and permission set correctly. You can pass on also to have the root sh executed, so I pass on my credentials. Still, when the installation is running, and this is very quick because it configures, the files are already in place, it configures now my files, but it will stop at one point and ask me, are you really sure for the root sh? Yes, I am. And that's it. It's installed. It has installed not only 19.3, but also the release update. Now I go to the bin directory, and here I execute ROOH CTL -enable. Read-only home CTL -enable, and it's really as quick as I show it here in the demonstration. That's it. Now I have a read-only home, separation of configuration and log files, and on the other side, the Oracle home files. And this makes it much, much easier now to go, for instance, to 1910 in January or to the next RU. When we speak about read-only homes, there are 2 very important directories we have to discuss here. One is the Aura-based config and the other is the Aura-based home. And I would like to show you the difference and what these 2 mean. On the left side, you see the Aura-based config. So under this, directory variable, I would call it. We find a DBS directory which contains the password file and also the SP file of our database and the log file. Under the Aura base home, we find now the flexible parts of the installation, like the log files, OPatch, LS inventory stuff, network admin, DBS install, assistance. So these two parts are very important, because when I exchange now the home, I flip to a different home, then these stay constant. So my database will always, or my environment will always point to the files which I don't want to exchange when I provision a new home. And this is basically the idea of the read-only homes. Makes life much easier. Try it out. It's really a cool feature. Just make sure you are at 19C or newer. And as I said before, it's the default with 21C. So let's go on to the next feature from here.
Now I'd like to show you another online operation, online table move. This was introduced in 12.2, and it also requires, like the other online operation, that you have Enterprise Edition. In this example, I'm moving a table online into the user's table space. It is an online operation, so you can still do selects on the table, and you can even do DML, insert and delete on the table, while the database is moving it to another table space. At the very end of the operation, when the database has completed the move into the new table space, it needs to take a very short log on the table in order to complete the transition. But other than that, it is fully online, and you can use the table as if nothing is happening to it. If you want the move to happen a little faster, you can do it in parallel by adding a parallel clause to the statement. Now the parallel clause on the move operation only applies to the move itself. It doesn't change the default parallel degree on the table, so you shouldn't worry that all of a sudden now your selects will happen in parallel as well. No. Parallel on a move operation only applies to the move itself. Now I've talked about moving the table into a different table space, but actually you can use the command to change the physical storage layout of the table. So this means that you can also use the same command to, for instance, compress your table online, or uncompress if you want to go the other way around. Or you can combine it. So you move the table into a new table space, and in the same operation, you do compression or change other physical layouts as well. It works on tables, but it also works on partitions and even subpartitions. Something you need to be aware of is that when you use alter table move, it invalidates the statistics. So once you have moved the data into a new table space, you should gather new statistics. Now, in addition to that, the row IDs are changing. So if your application is relying on the row IDs, not many do, but be aware, row IDs, they are actually changing. Now I have a demo where I can show you how we can change the physical layout of a table while we're using it. So let's see how it works. I have my lots of data table, which is stored in the user's table space, and it's not compressed. I want to change that, so I use alter table move online into a new table space, and I'm also compressing it. While that happens, in another session, I'm inserting data into the table. It still works. And I could even query the data, do full table scans, or I can do parallel queries on the table. It still works. And at the very end, I can verify that the table is now moved to a different table space and compressed. So it's very simple, it's very easy, and it's even online to change the physical layout of your tables. But it also works on partition tables. I've mentioned that before, but you can even convert a regular heap table into a partition tables. In this example, I'm taking a regular heap table and converting it into a hash partition table. I've used the online clause, so the database will do it all online. I can still use the table even though it's being converted. And because I'm using the update indexes clause, I can here specify what should happen to the indexes that are on the table. In this example, I have a regular unique index on the table, and I decide to change that into a global index on my new partition tables. You can convert your table into any kind of partition table except reference partitioning. That's not supported. And just as a reminder, remember that if you're using hash partitioning, you should have the number of hash partitions be equal to something that is the power of 2. I've prepared a demo that shows you how you can easily convert a regular table into a partition table. So let's see how it works. I have my lots of data table, which is not partitioned, and I want to change that. So I use the alter table command to modify it into a hash partitioned tables. It should be online, and I decide to update my existing indexes into a global index. While that happens, in another session, I'll insert some data into lots of data. And I can even query the table. I can do parallel query on the table while it's being converted to a partition table. And after that, when I query DBA tab partitions, I now have 8 partitions. So, very simple. If you're an enterprise edition with the partitioning option, you can convert your regular tables into partition tables. You can keep the indexes, convert them to either global or local indexes, and it's an online operation, so you can still use the table while it's being changed by the database. Now, how cool is that?
Sorry for this interruption. Our next stop will be Mexico. So, Frederick, your turn now.
Hi, my name is Frederick Alvarez, and I am a member of the database upgrade team and also a developer of the Gradual. Today, I am going to talk to you about the Unplug-plug feature of the auto upgrade, and I am going to turn you into an Unplug-plug specialist using the auto upgrade. Let's start by recalling that the Unplug-plug is the procedure that you use to unplug a pluggable database from a CDB and plugging it into a target CDB to later perform the upgrade. Now let's talk about what the auto upgrade can do for us besides the Unplug-plug itself. It is also possible to specify the target PDB copy option that is going to be used during the process in case that you want to customize or to move the database file location from one place to another, or if you just want to keep the original data files as a part of a backup strategy. Besides these options, you can also run multiple unplugs simultaneously using the same auto-upgrade process instance and the same configuration file, which is going to make your life easier when you want to consolidate multiple PDBs which come from different source CDBs and that are being plugged into the same target CDB. All of these options can be enabled or disabled by changing a few characters in the configuration file. Without further hesitation, let's jump into the configuration file to learn how to use it. Behind me, there is a configuration file of a deploy which is performing an Unplug-plug of multiple PDBs being plugged into the same target CDB. The configuration file is composed of 3 main parts. The second part are the options associated to the first database being processed. In this case, is the UPG1, which is working over the SCDB18X, which is a CDB which has some PDBs and some options. And the second part are the options associated to the UPG2, which is working over an SCDB19X, which is another CDB of a different version. If we pay attention to the PDBs being unplugged from the SCDB18X, we will notice a few things. The first part is that we are processing 2 PDBs simultaneously, and we are defining a few options for each of them. In the case of PDBX, we are renaming it to PDBA, and we are using the dot notation because we are processing two PDBs. For the PDB2, we are renaming it to PDBB, and we are also specifying a custom file convert option for the PDBX. The file name convert option is going to perform a copy of the data files and is going to replace the string PDBX by PDBA, keeping the old data files. For the case of the second database being processed, in this case, the PDB2 from SCDB19X, we are specifying a new target PDB name and a custom file name convert option, which is changing it from PDB2 to PDBC. It is important to remember and to notice that since we are only processing one PDB, it is not necessary to use the dot notation as it was necessary for the previous example, because since we are only processing one PDB, the autograde will know that the target PDB name and the target PDB copy option is going to be used for the only PDB being processed. But when we are working over multiple PDBs, it is mandatory to use the dot notation in order to let the autoread know which target PDB name belongs to which PDB and which file name convert belongs to which PDB. As a last thing to notice, we can see that for both PDBs, so for both databases being processed, STDB18X and STDB19X, we are unplugging different PDBs and we are plugging them into the same target CDB, which is CDB21X. All of this is possible within the same configuration file running in the same autograde instance. So if we remove all the optional options, we can have a configuration file as simple as this. As you can see, we are omitting the target PDB name for both of the PDBs, and we are not specifying the target PDB copy option for neither of them. In this case, you might be wondering, okay, if I skip these options, what is going to happen? Well, the answer is that the autograde will default the values to the following options. For the PDB name that the PDB has is going to be reused, and also the existing data files will be reused. Congratulations, now you have become a full unplug and plug master. For the most part, this is pretty much all what you need to do in order to perform your unplug-plugs using the autograde. After the command has been issued, you just need to wait until everything finishes. If you get bored while this is happening, you can actually just type LSJ once in a while to monitor what's the current status of the operations of your jobs. In this case, I just type LSJ, and as you can see, we are just waiting for both jobs to finish. And after a few minutes, we will get this. Just as a double check measure, we are going to log into the target CV to see how it looked like. And that's about the autograde Unplug-plug feature. I am pretty sure that the next question you guys have is regarding the operating system support and the rack support. Well, the answer for this is that the autograde Unplug-plug features works on any CV version higher than 12.101, and also the autograde Unplug-plug works on rack systems, but for now it only works on Linux. Thanks for watching. If you have further comments or questions, do not hesitate in contacting either Mike, Daniel, or me. We are always eager to hear about your suggestions or ideas that we are happy to implement into the autograde. Thanks.
This feature here is one of my favorites, and it's one of the features you can't unfortunately turn off. Long identifiers. And when you upgrade to 12.2, 18, 19, 21 from a release below 12.2, and you check the upgrade logs, you will find out that there are a lot of dictionary changes, more than in previous releases. And a lot of these dictionary changes are credited to the long identifiers. And cautious. No offense to developers, but be careful when you tell developers about that feature, and you'll see in a second why. First of all, it's the standard since 12.201, and you can't turn it off. As soon as compatible is 12.2.0 or higher, long identifiers are enabled. So you can't turn it off, it's there, and now everything can be named up to 128 byte. I remember when I started in Oracle, I think my second or third service request I had 24 years ago was, can I name a table with like 50 byte as I could name it in another database, not in Oracle? And the answer was pretty clear. No, you can't. Who needs such long names? Yeah, Somebody needs such long names. So the exception now, and there are very few exceptions, and I think you can deal with that. The database name is still 8 byte or less. 30 byte or less is the restriction for table space name, disk group name, PDB names. And does anybody have rollback segments? Rollback segments. Okay, but I think you can deal with the rollback segments. That's not an issue. What can I do? I can create tables with fantastic long names. Like my new table gets now an extra long name because I can. And of course, I can do the same thing to columns. It works with columns for sure. And with extended if you need to. And believe me, this feature will be used as soon as possible. Why am I pointing this out? Because I remember when I gave a customer workshop and we explained this in the workshop, after a lunch break, one of the DBAs said, Mike, you have to look at this. They didn't know this before. It was very early in the 12.201 stage, and they had test installations. And it took less than half an hour until a developer already started creating columns with longer names or objects, procedures with longer names. It was already there. And so be aware, as soon as you tell people this will be used, it's a cool feature, but a few things need to be considered. And the things need to be considered. I can just repeat myself here. You can't turn it off. So exchanging data now with lower versions could be really causing trouble. So when you use data pump, for instance, and regardless if you do it with or without version, it just depends on which side you see the error. So here in that case, I export from a database that supports long identifiers to a version that does not support long identifiers. In this case, I set the version parameter. So for instance, I wanted to transfer data from a 19.0 database to a 11.2 database. So I said version equals 11.2 or 11.204 in that case. And then it warns me and says, hey, I cannot export the table data from this table here in the system user because, or this was a 12.1 export, long identifiers are not there. If I wouldn't have used the version parameter and just imported freehand into 11.2 or 12.1, I would have seen the error then during import. The same issue is more likely to happen when you exchange now data with database links between different databases. And some of your databases are older. From the SQLnet perspective, you have no problem, but now you have to be really careful. So this is the pitfall, but overall, cool feature. It will be adopted as soon as you tell people, I guarantee you.
It's a new feature. It's coming in 21, but I'm pretty sure that when you get to know it, you'll love it as well. It's expression-based parameters. It does sound very fancy, doesn't it? So let's see what it can actually do. What if you could set an init parameter to the outcome of a numeric operation? You could set CPU count to 8 divided by 2. Okay, it doesn't sound that cool. I could just as well have written 4. But imagine that I could set a parameter to the same value as another parameter. So if I want to set SGA target to the highest possible value, I could simply set it to the same value as SGA max size. SGA target equals SGA max size. So if I later on raise SGA max size, the target increases as well. Now that's pretty cool, I think. But you can actually also combine them. So you can use one parameter as input to a numeric calculation and set a parameter to that value. So imagine that I want to set the minimum value of my shared pool size to 20% of my SGA target. I could do the calculation myself, But again, if I later on raise SGA target, I would need to recalculate the size of the shared pool. Or I could just set the shared pool size to 20% of my SGA target, and then it'll change when I change SGA target as well. So you see where I'm getting? This is really cool. But it gets even better. You can use min and max functions. There is operator precedence that you can override, and you can combine them. So in this example, I'm subtracting 5 gigabytes from the SGA target and taking 20% of that. I compare it with 8 gigabyte or 8,000 megabyte, and I take the highest value of those two and set it to my shared pool size. Cool. But if that's not enough, I can also use environment variables as input. So for instance, on Windows, there's an environment variable called number of processes, which obviously gives you the number of processes in your system. So if you want to do instance caging and prevent one of your databases from using all the CPUs and a host, you could set it to the environment variables that has the number of processes divided by 2. So if you later on move the database to a more powerful host, that number will be recalculated and it'll have a new value. You can use it for also system commands as well as also session commands. It goes into your SP file, but you can even write it into your P file. So you can write it directly in your P file and start the database using that. This is really cool. Let me show you a demo where we can see how it's used in effect. Number of processes is set to 8 on this system. It's an environment variable, and I use it as input for a numeric operation, and I calculate my CPU count to 4. Also, I can see that SGA target is a little lower than SGA max size. So I set SGA target to the value of SGA max size. Now SGA target has been raised. Also, I haven't defined a minimum size for my shared pool. It's 0, undefined. So I set it to 20% of my SGA target, and now it's set to 6 gigabytes. So these are some examples of how you can use expressions in your init order parameters to have a more dynamic environment where things like CPU count or memory settings, they change when the database moves to a new host or the host or when more resources are added to the host. I know this is not a 10x performance improvement, but this is really something that can make your day-to-day life a lot easier as a DBA.
Now we are going to call North Carolina in the United States. Jeff, it's your turn.
Welcome everyone, my name is Jeff Smith. I'm a product manager here on the database team, and I'm going to talk to you about Oracle REST Data Services, or ORDS. My contact info is on the screen. Without further ado, let's jump in. ORDS started out as just a web listener for the database and for PL/SQL APIs. So if you had a procedure or a function that when invoked would result in HTML being printed, sent it as an out or a return, ORDS would take that HTML and bring it back down to your client. And it also allowed you to call those programs via HTTP. So ORDS has evolved to be much more than just a web gateway for your PL/SQL. We now allow you to host full RESTful web services for your Oracle database, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But basically, if you want to get, post, put, or delete things in and out of your database, ORDS makes that possible. We now also have a SQL Developer web interface delivered via ORDS. So if you want to query your database, manage your database, tune your database, you can do all of that via your browser, and that's all delivered via ORDS. ORDS also allows you to publish a management API for the database itself, so not for your tables and not for your SQL and PL/SQL, but APIs that help you take care of the database itself. And then finally, we provide SOTA for REST. So if you want a REST API for managing your documents and your collections in the Oracle database, Words makes that also possible. Now, if you want to learn more about any of these features in more detail, just go to our webpage, and we made it as simple as possible. You just go to oracle.com/rest. On the web listener, that's most likely going to be surfaced if you're an Application Express or Oracle Apex customer. You should also know that ModPL SQL has been officially deprecated and desupported, and going forward, if you want to have a supported infrastructure for running web applications out of the database, that needs to be done via words. For the RESTful web services, you can take a table or an existing stored procedure and say, hey, I want there to be a set of HTTP endpoints that can be called to interact and access these objects. We call that the auto feature. So very, very low code. It's just one PL SQL API call to enable those features. Or you can remain in complete control and publish your own RESTful web services that are built on your PL SQL and your SQL. The responses that Words provides take care of things like paging results, so you don't overwhelm your web client with a million rows. Instead, you get page 1, page 2, page 3. We automatically take the output of your queries and your store procedures and wrap them in as JSON documents, and we provide proper HTTP responses, so you get the right status codes, you get all the links you would expect. These services are defined in a schema in the database, so what these services can do are controlled by the security and resource definitions that you have applied on these schemas. So you can't publish a REST API that can drop the database if that user, that schema, does not have that ability to do that. Building your RESTful web services, you can do that via classic interfaces like SQL Developer on your desktop or Bash, via our command line interface like SQL-CL. You can use the PL SQL API, and now we also have a full REST development interface in both Application Express and SQL Developer Web. Words is a core feature of Oracle Autonomous, so any autonomous database that spins up is going to have Words there. It's going to make SQL Developer Web available, it's going to make Application Express available, and it's going to allow you to publish RESTful web services for your autonomous instances, but you can also run Words anywhere you'd like for any Oracle database on-prem or in OCI. Here's just an example of a RESTful web service. Instead of saying select star from employees or department ID equals 50, I can just do a get on HR/employees/query parameter department ID 50, and Words automatically takes that, wraps that to the proper SQL statement, gets the results, puts it back down to the client as JSON, and has it paged for you. And we also provide links to each of the individual records. So if you're building a web application on top of this table, your fancy user interface can just take advantage of these existing endpoints, and navigation is made easy with all of the links. These are, of course, secured, so you can't just give these links to anyone and they can start using them. They're going to have to be authenticated and authorized. So the endpoints are secured with privileges, and if you don't have the right role, then you don't get to touch these things and your data remains safe. In addition to RESTful web services, you can use Words to publish SQL Developer Web, which is a single-page app for accessing and managing your Oracle database. So you get a SQL worksheet for running queries. You get management and monitoring screens, including Performance Hub. You get the REST development interface. You get an interface for working with your JSON document store. You can manage your Oracle users, and you can do data modeling and generate rich relational diagrams and data dictionary reports. For the database management REST APIs, so this is for managing and monitoring your database itself. There are over 500 endpoints that make different APIs and different data dictionary views available for you via HTTPS. So here's an example of me kicking off a data pump export job by just doing a simple post to the appropriate endpoint and passing the data pump parameters via the HTTP post body, and in this case is a JSON document. SOTA for REST. So if you're going to treat your Oracle database as a JSON document store and you want a REST API to manage those documents and those collections, Words provides that out of the box. This is also there for the new autonomous JSON document service, and you can do posts and gets and puts and deletes just like you would if you were using something else like Mongo. So if I want to create a collection, if I want to do a bulk document array insert, I can do those via REST calls. And I can also run queries using the query by example syntax. So all of this is included with your Oracle database license, even if it's a free database. Ord supports both our classic architecture, so single instance, single database, and also our multi-tenant architecture. So if you have a container with 200 pluggable databases, you can install Ords once and have it available for all of those PDBs. So Ords is developed and maintained by the database team for the database team. So as new database features come in, we're there to build up the APIs and tooling around those. Ords, like many of the other database tools products, we had to quarterly releases. So every 3 months you should see an update for both cloud and on-prem. Just really quickly, Ords is a Java application. You can deploy it as a standalone process. It includes an embedded Jetty web server, or if you'd like, you can roll it into an existing Tomcat or WebLogic mid-tier. Each database connection pool serves a database. So you could have one Ords supporting 50 databases, in which case there'd be 50 JDBC connection pools in there, one for each. They each get their own mapping patterns, so the URIs that you would see in the requests that go tell Ords which database that request goes to. You can also, have one Ords for each database if you'd like. It's really up to you. If you want to see how to install, configure, and build your first RESTful web service, I have another video that you can find that takes you through all of that. It's only about 15 minutes. And if you have more questions or if you want to find more information, all you have to do is Google it. And you know what? Our friend Oracle Base has tons and tons of articles and videos as well that cover Ords. So I know I went a little bit over 5 minutes. Thanks for indulging me. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. And thanks again to Mike and the team for letting me talk to you today. Cheers.
Time for a break, isn't it? Those were a lot of features right now in 1 hour. We started with extended varchar 2. Then Daniel introduced you to the online data file move. I showed you how to minus apply RU and patches in one pass with the installation. And then Daniel went into the online table move, which is a super cool feature. Frederick gave you an introduction into Unplug-plug upgrade and a deep dive. Then we spoke about long identifiers, a feature everybody will use since 12.201, which you can't turn off. Super cool 21C feature, expression-based parameters. And then Jeff Smith showed us what REST services, data services can do. So now we will do a 5-minute break. And then we have another 8 features. And Connor is coming as well. So stay tuned, grab something to drink, and we will let music go on and the counter count down.
Okay, next on the agenda is Data Guard. We added a few cool features in 19C that I'm pretty sure you will find very useful. The first feature that I would like to mention is automatic replication of restore points. Previously, when you created a restore point on the primary database, you would have to create it on the standby database manually as well. This now changes in 19C. When you create a restore point on the primary database, it is automatically also created on the standby databases. The information about the restore point is sent via redo to the standby databases, where the restore point is then also created. Since the information flows with redo, it requires that the MRP process is running on the standby database, i.e., it's applying redo. The name of the restore point on the standby databases is suffixed with primary so you can easily identify them, but there is also a column called replicated which shows whether or not this is a replicated restore point. In addition to that, it's worth to notice that restore points on the standby database are always normal restore point. So even if you create a guaranteed restore point on the primary database, it will become a normal restore point on the standby database. This is by design because we don't want any interruptions on the standby database that is caused by, for instance, the fast recovery area filling up. The next thing that I would like to mention is automatic flashback. When you issue a flashback command on the primary database, now in 19C, the standby database automatically follows. The MRP process on the standby database detects that the primary database has flashed back, and it causes the standby database to flash back as well. It'll then start a new incarnation and apply the new redo from the standby database to keep up. So all this now happens automatically. Since it is the MRP process that handles the flashback, it also means that redo apply must be running on the standby database in order for it to detect that there is a flashback database and catch up. Now this works on the scope of the entire database, but also on individual PDBs. If for some reason that your standby database doesn't have the required flashback logs to issue the flashback database, you would then need to manually restore and recover the data files to bring it in a state where the MRP process can catch up with the redo. If for some reason that you don't want the standby database to automatically flash back, you either have to cancel redo apply or start the database or open the database, but that requires a license for the active data guard. And the last feature that I would like to talk about is DML redirect. So this is an option, or this requires the active data guard license. And when you have it on your standby database, you can issue a DML statement and insert, update, or delete. And even though you are doing it on the standby database, which is open and read-only, it'll detect that, send the statement back to the primary database where it's executed. The change blocks then flows via redo to the standby database. And when that has happened, you gain control of your session on the standby database. So immediately after you've inserted some data on the standby database, you can query the same data because you don't regain control of your session until the same blocks have been applied via redo on the standby database. Now, this feature is very suitable for applications that does an occasionally write from time to time. But if you have an application that's really doing a lot of DML, it's not suitable to run it on the standby database. I prepared a demo that shows all these 3 new features, so let's see how it works. First, let's talk about restore point replication. I'm connected here to the primary database. First, I'm going to create a user, a table, and insert a row just to have some data that we can use for the demo. And now I'm going to create a restore point. I've chosen to create a guaranteed restore point, and you can see that the replicated column is set to no because we are on the primary database. Now, on the standby database, if I issue the same statement, you can see that it has primary suffix to the name. It's listed as a replicated restore point. And guaranteed flashback database is set to no. As I mentioned before, this is by design, and all replicated restore points are normal restore points on the standby database. Now I open the database just to see that my record 1 is there on the standby database. Now I'm going to restart the database in mount mode, just so we have it in a good state for the next demo. Now I'm going to insert an additional value to the table. And I've broken the database. This was a really bad situation, so I decide to issue a flashback database. I restart and flashback the database. And then I open with reset logs. Now everything is good on the primary database. But let's switch to the standby database and examine the alert log. And as you can see, the standby database has detected that the primary database flashed back, and it has issued a flashback database, and it is now keeping up with the new incarnation that was started on the primary database. I can open and see that the record 2 does not exist anymore on the standby database. Now back on the primary, I'm inserting another value, 42. And as you can see on the standby database, the data is still synchronized to the standby database, so redo apply still works. Now let's have a look at DML redirect. I'm connected to the standby database and I try to insert a statement. It fails because the standby database is in read-only mode. So let's try to use this new feature. And now my insert statement works. So the command is now sent to the primary database, it's executed, the changes flows via redo to the standby, it's applied, and I can now query the data. That's very simple. And as expected, the record is still there on the primary database. And finally, let's see that drop restore point command now also propagates to the standby database. So on the primary, I drop my restore point. It no longer exists. And as expected on the standby database, there is no restore point as well. So as you can see, there are a few very useful features added to standby database operations in 19C.
And now we are happy to welcome another guest, and we have to take a long flight to Down Under. So welcome, Connor.
G'day everyone, Connor McDonald here from Perth. It's 40 degrees here today in Perth, or 105 in Fahrenheit if that's more your language. This is Kings Park. It sits atop Perth. There's some fantastic views. In fact, I'll spin around and show you. That's Perth there in the background, Perth City. Beautiful blue skies. And the best thing is, anyone can come here. It's free, it doesn't cost anything. And this isn't the only place in Perth that's free. And this is my local beach. So much coastline, generally it's pretty quiet. And of course it's also free to come here. On a day like today, the wind is absolutely howling down here. So let's head back to Kings Park. Of course, not everything at Kings Park is free. If you want the finest experience, the fine restaurants, wining and dining, then you have to pay for them. But it's nice to get most of the goodness here for free. And that's a lot like some of the free stuff we now have in 19C when it comes to multi-tenant database. There's always been so much goodness in multi-tenant. Rapid provisioning, one-line cloning, refreshable clones, sparse clones if you're tight on disk space. You can do hot cloning with no service disruption. You can have multiple character sets in each of the pluggables. So many good things. You can have common users, local users. You can share information across pluggables with application containers. You can even back up the entire container as one. You can patch the whole thing as one. It's just a really cool piece of technology. But for many, it's often been seen as out of reach because of licensing. But now, just like Kings Park here, you can get a chunk of that goodness for no cost, for free. In 19C, you can have up to 3 pluggables for no license fee. And the cool thing with that is, now you get to test out all the features in multi-tenant to see if they're a great suit for your business. But it's not just testing out, there's actually other benefits as well, even with only 3 free pluggable databases. Because just with 3, now for example, I could have a master copy of my Deb pluggable database and a clone, and that clone could be refreshed each day, for example. If I'm using XE, I could then unplug that clone and dispatch it out to every developer running a copy of XE on their own desktop. The concept of continuous integration, developers having private sandboxes now becomes an option just by having those 3 pluggable databases for free. And if those benefits really transform your business, then just like the restaurant option here at Kings Park, you could go to a fully paid multi-tenant license. But even if not, just with 3, it's fair to say with 19C you can be swimming in pluggable databases. Speaking of swimming, back here at the beach, it's just like Kings Park. It's free, but you can also pay for some extra benefits, extra options. You can rent chairs and umbrellas and stuff like that. And the same now goes for the in-memory option in the Oracle database. Every in-memory demo I've ever done blows people's minds. Queries that ran for hours now ran sub-second. But as we all know, it's a separately licensed option. But just like the beach here, in 19C now you can get it for free. You can have up to 16 gigabytes of in-memory option with no license to be paid. Just make sure you're on the latest release updates of 19, 19.8 or 19.9. But once you've done that, you can now use in-memory. And once again, it's not just for testing or trials. I'll link a blog post below which shows you that we had a 500 million row table of transactions and we managed to squeeze that into in-memory due to the nice compression algorithms. Think about this, you could have partition tables and just put the most recent partitions into the in-memory and leave the rest out. That way you get the benefits of in-memory without having to pay any in-memory license fee. And just like renting chairs and stuff at the beach here, if you find in-memory really transforms your business, then you can make that next jump to get that real good return on the in-memory license investment. But you can now have it for free. So take a fresh look at the latest version of the Oracle database. The amount of free stuff you can get in there is simply amazing.
SQL patch. What's that? Interesting feature. Also there for a long time. Got introduced as a secret internal feature at first before it became official. And the idea is, we have that statement here, select star from I am slow. And we want to make this run faster. Now there are a lot of techniques to do that. But we immediately figure out we could apply a hint to that. Maybe you don't have tuning and diagnostic pack, so you can't run the SQL Tuning Advisor. But that feature I would like to show you is not only an Enterprise Edition feature, that is available also in Standard Edition. And we used that recently in a very interesting case. And I don't have the case here in the slides, but we have auto upgrade running in a custom environment. And that customer had really an incredibly long list of table spaces in the database. Now, the upgrade scripts or auto upgrade does a check on the table spaces for their specs. And a query run really, really long. So we wanted to speed that up, and the consultant being on site immediately found out it's running serial. It doesn't use the parallel capabilities because the underlying table in the dictionary or some of the tables in the dictionary we access have no parallel degree and nothing happened. So what we did is we isolated the query and we added a parallel hint to it with SQL patch. And that worked magically very, very well. So let me show you that. The idea is we repair a statement. That is something we do with this package. What I would like to show you, I don't want to show you the repair capabilities. I would like to show you the capabilities of adding hints. So I would like to add a hint, and it's fully transparent to the application. So the cool part of that feature is the application sends still my select star from I am slow. But I add now a hint to it. And I do this manually. It's transparent. The application doesn't have a clue, still sends the same statement. It's persistent, of course. So you start up the database, you shut it down. You can even transport the SQL patch if you need to. That's all working as expected. I told you up front that feature got introduced a long while ago. It's, I think, the oldest feature we have here in the presentation today. It got introduced in 11G and 12.1 with a package called DBMS SQL Diag Internal. And when something is called internal, two things happen. First of all, some people say, why do they call it internal? Let me try this out. What is it doing? And then you have blog posts all over the place and people figuring out what that can do. And then you open an SR, and what happens then is obvious. Support tells you, no support for this, because that's internal, right? The name told you already. Why have you used that? So since 12.2, this is official, and you can use it before as well. There are also blog posts by the optimizer guys out there, by Nigel Bayliss about it, or presentations. I remember a very good presentation by Nigel at UK OUG a while ago about that. So pretty cool. Jonathan Lewis had blogged about it, other people, Kerry Osborne. So it's really a long while out there. And the important thing is it's available not only in Enterprise Edition, this works in Standard Edition too as well. It doesn't require additional licenses as far as I could find out. So it's documented. I have here the link from the 19C documentation. And as I told you before, it can do a lot more, really. I just picked one piece of that feature. And if you need some cool scripts, I like still the, oh my God, 2013, 8-year-old blog post from Kerry Osborne, who linked also some cool scripts with that, like create SQL patch, which interactively allows you to create your SQL patch and pass on the right hint. Let me show you how that works. So first of all, a version difference, because 11.2 and 12.1, it was named differently. So in that case, we have to use dbms SQL diag internal dot I_create patch. Whereas since 12.2 on the right side here of the slide, it's called dbms SQL diag and simply create SQL patch. Makes more sense. So what do we pass on? We pass on the SQL text or an ID, the hint we would like to add, and we give the SQL patch a name. That's basically how it works. And let me show you this in a quick demo because this is more obvious. So let me start here. I connect with my user, in this case Hugo, and select count star from Bigtable. So you see it has like almost 18 million rows in that table. I said now auto trace, and one thing to mention, auto trace is not always accurate, but for my thing it does the right thing. Simple query for object ID lower than 800. So you see table access by index, row ID, index range scan, and obviously because I hinted it. So this application has gotten that hint. We have the plan hash value. I picked the plan hash value, and now I need to find out what is the plan or SQL ID. So I get my SQL IDs here. From checking a little bit more, I knew that it is the first ID here. So I picked the first ID, and I prepared already a script. So the patch.sql. Here, I create a SQL patch on that SQL ID, and I won't ignore all optimizer embedded hints because I realized that application has programmed very badly here. So I start patch, I execute my script. Now the SQL patch is in place. I execute the exact same query, and you see here, now I get the output. The patch has been used. It went from 9 seconds to 4 seconds. And it was much faster. It read less data. And that's a really, really helpful feature.
The next feature I would like to talk about is Keystore Password External Store. This is a feature that is very handy for those of you that have databases that are encrypted with TDE. This feature came into the database in 12.2, and it is something that you can use with TDE tablespace encryption. If you're using one of our OCI cloud offerings, this comes as part of your regular license. But for all the other databases and for your on-premises databases, this requires Enterprise Edition and the advanced security option. If you're used to work with encrypted databases, you're familiar with the administer key management commands. And often when you use that, you have to specify the Keystore in order to allow operations into the Keystore. And you will need to specify the Keystore password. It could also be that you're creating a pluggable database based on another encrypted PDB. And in order to import the encryption keys, you need to specify the Keystore password. As you can see here, the Keystore passwords are written in clear text, and that's not very secure. Someone might see the Keystore password on your terminal, or if you have the commands stored in a script, or if you're using some sort of external scheduler, you would need to set the Keystore passwords in those tools. That's not very secure. So imagine if you could do this instead. Use the same administer key management commands or create pluggable database statements, but instead of specifying the Keystore password in clear text, you could simply write external store. Now, what does external store mean? Well, basically, it's simply just an auto login wallet that the database can use to store the Keystore password. Now, the external store is a very little file that is stored in the operating system. You should protect the file, but the file itself is actually also encrypted with an encryption key that only the database know. So the Keystore password is safe while it's stored in the external store. But it's much easier for you to use because you don't have to specify the Keystore password. Now, a lot of the commands that require a Keystore password can use the external store, but for security reasons, some commands still require that you have to type in the Keystore password. Now, this solution allows you to have proper separation of duties in your organization. You can have one set of DBAs that are managing the encryption part. They have access to the Keystore and know the Keystore password. And you can have another set of DBAs or application people that can create new pluggable databases, even though they are encrypted. In addition to that, if you have scripts or if you're creating pluggable databases from other tools, you don't have to hard code your Keystore password in the scripts or in the tools. You can simply use the external store instead. And you can avoid having to type the Keystore password in clear text on your terminal. I've prepared a little demo where I can show you how you can easily set up the Keystore password external store and use it to create an encrypted PDB without specifying the Keystore password. So let's see how it works. This is a container database, and I'm using a regular auto login wallet. In PDB1, I have one tablespace sysox that is encrypted with TDE. Now, to set up Keystore password external store, I first have to create a folder in the operating system where I can store it. And I then tell the database where it should store it. It's a static parameter, so when I set it up for the first time, I have to restart the database. After that, I can tell the database to store my Keystore password in the external store, and I do that by adding a secret. And when I use for client TDE wallet, I tell the database that this is my Keystore password. After that, I close PDB1, I unplug it, and I drop it. And then next we can start to create new PDBs using PDB1 as a template. So for the first example, I'm going to be creating PDB2, and I'm specifying the Keystore password in clear text. This is what you would normally do, and that's not very secure for the reasons that we just talked about. But notice that when I create the next PDB, I'm specifying external store. I can still create the PDB even though it is encrypted, and I don't have to specify the Keystore password. So this is much safer. And just to be sure that it works, I'll open the pluggable databases. I can see that they are using the Keystore. The new PDBs are using the Keystore. And the tablespaces sysox is encrypted in those two new PDBs. So everything works. I can still create new encrypted PDBs, even though I don't have the Keystore password. So for those of you that are using TDE, this is a really good solution that can make your day-to-day life much easier and much more secure. And actually, I see this as a must-have for those of you that are using TDE and have automation where you need to use the Keystore password to, for instance, create new pluggable databases.
Our next cool feature, online encryption. And this is a feature which is there also since quite a while. We actually introduced it with 12.201. So before 12.201, if you wanted to encrypt a table space, you had to take the table space offline and then encrypt it. Since 12.201, you can do this online. Very simple, as you see on the slides, all the table space name, encryption, online encrypt, and that's it. Only thing you need to be aware of is in the background, we require twice the disk space. So if your table space is like 26 terabytes, you will need another 26 terabytes for the online encryption as well. If you don't have the space available, you can still go with the old technique of the online encryption. You could also now encrypt system sysaux and undo, even though even our internal experts or people from the MAA team would not recommend you doing this. With 12.2 and 18, we introduced also the ability to encrypt when you restore with Armin, and to decrypt, which is in some cases even more important. But officially that feature is only there since 18C because it got included in the 18C documentation. But I found several blog posts where people tried this out and showed that it works very well in 12.201 as well. Now, when we want to do this, before you really can encrypt a table space, a few prep steps are necessary. And I will very quickly go through these steps because I rather would like to show you this in a quick demo afterwards. We first need to prepare the wallet root. So a directory where the wallet or the key stores go into. We set the init parameter wallet root and TDE configuration. Then we create the password protected key store, which in the old terminology was called a wallet. So we create that, identified by a very secret password here. And then I can check and I see, okay, the wallet is closed, but there is a wallet associated with the database. In this case, it's a multi-tenant database. So you see the conid1 is my root container, conid2 is pdb$seed, and conid3 is my PDB here. When I check on the file system, I see once I created that key store, I have now the ewallet.p12 file on disk. Next step is I have a key store. I need to open it. And for opening the key store, I have to specify the password. So open force key store identified by the password for all containers. Now you see a change in the $encryption wallet view. You see that it's open, but no master key associated yet. So let's do that. Let's create a master key for the CDB root. So administer key management, set key identified by my secret password with backup. And this applies not only to the CDB root, but you see it also in $encryption wallet here. It applies to the PDB seed implicitly as well. Still, it does not apply for my PDB. So I need to do the same step here for my PDB. I change into my container PDB1, set the key, and then also here the encryption wallet tells me that the status is open here. Now it's a good idea to make this, if possible, if your policies allow that, to make this an auto login key store, because otherwise you don't have to specify your password all the time. Administer key management, create auto login key store. And this would be also something we would require you for an upgrade at the moment, because otherwise auto upgrade to be precise, because auto upgrade requires you to have an auto login key store. If you think, oh, this is something I don't want to have, do it for the upgrade. You can revert it later on to the previous behavior. When we check now on disk, you see that we have more files. We have also now a C wallet, SSO, and for the containers, separate e-wallet key stores here. And once all this is done, this was the prep stuff, now I can encrypt my table space. So here I go into my PDB1, I have my table space test. It was there before, and I simply say alter table space test encryption online encrypt, and it's encrypted. But what happens to future table spaces? If I create a fresh table space now, at this point, it will be unencrypted. So what I need to do here is I set alter system set encrypt new table spaces to always. That means all the future table spaces in this database will be encrypted by default. And now I create my table space future here, size 100M auto extend online, and you see it in the DBA table spaces. It will be encrypted right from start. So don't forget this extra step. So this is a really useful feature, online encryption, there since 12.201, and extremely helpful in all the environments. Now, as promised, a quick demo. So we create the directory at first, where our key stores go in, opens equal plus, and the first parameter I set is wallet_root. This is very important because it makes the handling much easier than in earlier releases. I have to restart my database. I set TDE_configuration now, pointing to that file. And the next step is creating the password protected Keystore. So administer key management, create Keystore. Now let us check here with a script. From the $V encryption wallet, and we see the file we're pointing to. Let's check the file is on disk, all is good. Now I have to open all pluggable databases because I have to open the Keystore, administer key management, set Keystore open force. And the fourth step is now creating a master key at first in the $CDB root. And then I switch to the PDB. So all the sessions at container equals PDB1 in my case. And I create the master key in the PDB. Same command here. Going back to the root container, what I want is the Keystore auto login ideally. Not everybody wants that, but it makes our life here easier. So administer key management, create auto login Keystore, go back to the PDB. Because what I wanted to show you initially, that was online encryption. And you see no table space is encrypted at this point. So let's encrypt online the test table space. So it takes, this is really real time here, so I didn't shorten that. It takes a few seconds, not a big table space. Now let's check afterwards with DBA table spaces. Now you see it's encrypted, all good. But what happens if I create a new table space? And in order to have future table spaces encrypted as well, I said encrypt new table spaces equals always. And once I have this and I create a new table space called here future, you see also the future table space is encrypted.
Gradual password rollover. This is a little handy feature that's coming in 21. What it basically does is that it allows a user to have two passwords at the same time. So this can be very handy if you have an application that connects to the database with a username and password. When you have to rotate that password, what you would normally do is that you shut down the application, which means an outage. You then change the password in the database, and then you can restart the application. But with this new feature, you can change the password in the database, and you can allow both passwords to be valid for a certain amount of time. And that should give you enough time to change the application and ensure that it works with the new password. So let's see how you can do it. It's all connected to your profile. So in this example, I'm creating a new profile and I specify password rollover time and I set it to 1. This gives me 1 full day, 24 hours from the time that I changed the password. After that, I can create a regular user and assign him that profile. So when that user changes his password, he can use both the new and the old password until the rollover time expires. Or, if you want, you can manually expire the rollover period when you're sure that the new password works correctly. The minimum rollover time you can specify is 1 hour and the maximum is 60 days. So let's see how it works. I've prepared a little demo where we can see it in action. First, I create a profile and I set the rollover time to 1 day. Next, I create a user and I give it a password. And I assign the profile that we just created. And then I'm going to create session so we can log on to the database. You can see from DBA users that the account status is open. Now I'm going to change the password of the user to new password. And if I query DBA users again, you can see that the account is now open and in rollover period. You can use both passwords. So let's try to connect to the database using the old password. And it works. I'm connected as app user. But at the same time, let's try to connect with the new password. And I'm using the same TNS alias, so I'm going to the same database. And there again, I'm connected as app user. If I log on to the database, I can see that it's open and in rollover period. If I want to manually expire the rollover period, I can simply do an alter users command, and the account status goes back to open, and you can only use the new password. That's very simple, And it's a really good way where you can rotate your password and increase security on your organization.
Now another cool feature, privilege capture. And with privilege capture, it's quite interesting because a lot of customers I work with, have gone the track of least privileges. And when you have a packaged application, it's often very hard. You are bound to the application instruction, and it requires to create some users, or the application install script creates some users in the database. And maybe some of the privileges the user gets are not really needed. And this is where privilege capture comes in. What we see very often is grant DBA to the abuser and with admin option. This is fantastic. And you may have heard or seen this already, somebody calling you and saying, I do this, I develop something here, and just give me DBA privileges. And of course, say, okay, grant DBA to abuser, and best thing with admin option. Yeah, no. I'm pretty certain you don't do that, or you have a hard time doing this. Let's see what privilege capture can add here. So the idea is we implement the concept of least privileges. We report used privileges and grant paths, and we report unused privileges. That is the idea of the privilege capture. And the very important thing, and this is why we decided that we want to include this in our slides here. Somebody made a not so wise decision in the early days and said, oh, this requires the data vault option. Now, the data vault option is not an option everybody has. So not many people use that. And with 18c, this became a standard enterprise edition option, and not just from 18c on, it applied backwards to 12.201 as well. So from 12.201, and this is why I have the screenshots from license guides here for different releases on the slide, you see in 12.1, it's still requiring data vault option, and from 12.201 on, it's not there anymore. So if you have Enterprise Edition, feel free to use that. And when we do this, the package dealing with privilege capture is DBMS privilege capture, very obvious. And it has some very important subroutines. And the first step is that we create a capture. So in this case here, I would like to find out about the tuning privileges. So I do a DBMS privilege capture, I create a capture, and for a specific user. So let's assume the user Smith here, that is my application user, and I would like to evaluate the privileges in regards to tuning here. When I have the capture created, I need to enable it to be in place. So enable the capture, and now it starts recording. And you run this for a period of time. This doesn't have to be like only 30 minutes. It could be days or weeks if necessary. At one point, when you disable the capture, then we stop the recording of the privileges the user Smith used here. And then we need to generate the results. So very simple, generate result, tuning privs. That was my capture policy I created. And what information do I get here? I generate the results, and when I generate the results, some views in the database get populated. So there's a long list of views actually. I just pick 2 examples here. If you're interested, I didn't see a reason to put all of them on a slide because the documentation link I had on the first slide here lists all of them. But the DBA used sysprivilege path. So this tells me now that the user Smith here had analyzed any and got it through the impful database role. So you see the exact path, how the user got to that privilege. And he used it. Okay. Even more important, and I figure out this is the information you typically are looking for, are the unused privileges. What does Smith has and really doesn't need it? So here we found out, oh, Smith had administer any SQL tuning set because I went under tuning privileges. Database trigger, resource manager, administer SQL tuning sets, all the any assembly, whatever that is, on commit refresh. So all these privileges were granted implicitly to that application user, but none of them was used. That's cool. Let's revoke them right away, right? Yeah, be careful. So first of all, if I want to start another run, I delete this one so I can start the same run again, or I drop the capture. And the drop is actually not longer needed. Anyways, whatever you do, it wipes out the information from the views. So basically, the views get only populated when you start a capture and enable it. Once you disable it, you find the information, and then you can generate the reports. And once you drop or delete the run, then the views will be wiped, and you're ready for the next run. In order to do that, you need the capture admin role. And in multi-tenant, an analysis needs to be run on each container. So if you have 689 PDBs and you have the user Smith in all of them, you need to check, of course, in all these PDBs. Only one capture policy can be active at a given time. I think this is a bit of a downside, but it's like how the feature is created, because there's only the structure underneath and the views get populated and then wiped out again. So only one policy capture can be active at a given time. And it sounds great. And I told you, let's remove them. Be careful. Be really careful, because it may be that your capture period was too short. It could be that, let's say, the end of the month calculations, the asset report, run also with the Smith user, needs exactly one of the privileges you revoked. So be a bit careful, check the privileges before you revoke them, and keep note on what you revoked. Just in case somebody calls you a few weeks later and says, oh my God, Smith can't do this report anymore. What's wrong here? We get these strange errors. Then you can figure out and say, oh, I secretly give them better back. No, but honestly, just be careful with that. It just could be that you missed something. And as I said, the results are kept until the capture run or policy gets deleted. A very cool feature, Enterprise Edition feature. I worked with customers using that. I think it's extremely helpful. So give it a trial. It's Enterprise Edition standard. And yeah, let's go on with the next feature from here.
Okay, so far we've seen some pretty cool features and even some cool new ones. But now I'm going to show you a real golden oldie, Secure External Password Store. This was first introduced in 10G. Yeah, you heard me right, 10G. And yet still, I rarely see it used outside in the real world. And I really find it's a shame. It is such a cool feature that can really increase security in your organization. So please, people, start using it. But let's see what it can do. I guess you've seen this many times around in your scripts, in your scheduling tools, or in your cron jobs. Connect to the database with a username and password out there in clear text. But what if you could do this? Connect to the database as the same user, but without specifying the username and password. This would be much more secure. And you can. With Secure External Password Store, it is the TNS alias that controls which set of stored credentials that you can use to connect to the database. And in SQLnet.aura, you can tell the client where it can find the Keystore that has the credentials that you need to connect to the database. And then finally, you can create a Keystore, which is basically an encrypted file stored in your local file system, but it's encrypted with an encryption key that only the client knows. And it holds your credentials. You can use the mkstore command to add credentials into the file, and you use the TNS alias as an identifier, and then you specify the username and password. Obviously, this is a much more secure solution, and it allows proper separation of duties. You can allow people to connect to the database without knowing the username and password. You can avoid having hard-coded passwords in your script, and you can avoid typing your password in clear text in the terminal. All these things are something that really increases security. Now, I've prepared a small demo where I'll show it in action. And in this example, I'm connecting to a non-CDB database, but you can use this feature to connect to any database, PDB, RAC, non-CDB root. As long as you connect via a TNS alias, you can use the secure external password store to store your credentials. But enough talking, let's see it in action. First, I'm going to show you how you can connect with username and password. I'm just going to start up with setting my TNS admin variable. And here I have a script which basically just logs on to the database and tells me which user I've logged in as and with which authentication method. Now I'm going to connect to the database by specifying username and password, and then I'm going to execute this script. And you can see that I've logged on as batch and I've authenticated with a password, which makes sense because I've specified that on the command line to SQL+. But it's not very secure. So let's see how we can use stored credentials and the secure external password store to make it better. First, I have to create a Keystore, and I use the mkstore command for that. I have to specify a Keystore password that I have to use when I make changes to the Keystore. Next, I can add credentials. I use the TNS alias as an identifier, and then I specify the username and password that should be used when you connect with this alias. Now in SQLnet.org, you can see where the Keystore is located. It's specified with the wallet location parameter. And now I can connect to the database without specifying a username and password. It uses the alias to look in the Keystore for a set of stored credentials. And when it finds it, it can use those credentials instead of specifying it on the command line. And as you can see, I'm still logged on as batch. I'm still authenticated with a password, although I haven't specified on the command line. This is really a very cool, much more secure solution that you can use when you have to execute something like batch scripts or reporting. So I really find this something of interest, and I really believe you should look into it today or tomorrow.
Take a deep breath. You made it. 16 features in less than 2 hours. We started before the break with extended varchar 2, and then the online move of data files and tables. How to install and patch in one pass. Unplug-plug upgrade, thanks to Frederick. Long identifiers, super cool. Every developer loves that. Expression-based parameters, that's something really fancy in 21C. And then thanks again to Jeff for an introduction into Oracle REST data services. And then after the break, DataGuard by Daniel, new stuff, very cool things in there. Free options, thanks to Connor again. I would love to go to the Perf Beach now. SQL patch, this is so powerful. We just took a very small piece of that. And then Keystore password external store. After then, online encryption, super helpful. Cool feature since 12.201. Gradual password rollover, another new cool feature in 21C. Privilege capture, enterprise edition part since 12.201. And finally, something extremely useful, the secure external password store. Maybe the oldest feature in the entire presentation today. We still have 10 features left, so we won't cover them today, of course not, but maybe in a few months we'll do a second part of cool features, not only for DBAs.
That's it, we've reached the end.
We really hope that you learned something new today and that one or the other feature you're really desperate to try out now immediately after today's webinar. We will hang around for a little while in the chat to answer your questions, of course.
If you are thirsting for more, we really hope to see you at our next virtual classroom seminar in February. Until then, take care and thanks for watching.